Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, October 22nd, 2019. Time for yet another show. Tuesday, who knows what a Tuesday could bring. Could be anything. Could be a total collapse of our forces in the Middle East. Could be total collapse of our regime at home. Could be total collapse of our constitutional government at home. Could be total collapse of next to nothing. And everything could be fantastic. Things could be getting better for all we know. I don't know. Many things could happen today, and we'll try and catch up on which one of them it is we'll be saddled with for the rest of the day, and see which direction we go with in terms of updating you. There's the more staid and longer form reporting socked away for you in pocket. There's the vagaries of the Twitter timeline stored away there as well. But Daily Co's Radio now live with me, host Kagro X, reliably told all the way from Portland, Maine. Bill always on the case here. Today, the 5th, 10th, and 25th callers, we're very generous today, will all win an ambassadorship to Ukraine. Free sash and certificate included. Do they still give out the sashes? They really should. Seems like a kind of a European thing. Like, is that old Europe? Do we not do that anymore? Did we ever do it? I really don't know. But it seems like a fantastic and fun aspect of things. We should bring back the powdered wigs as well. Judges should be forced to wear wigs in court, and maybe the lawyers too. I think everybody could kind of go for that. Back in the old days with those sashes. And you used to hang all your medals on those sashes too. Now, like a merit badge, really. Those are just fancier Boy Scouts, I think. Oh well. Or was it the Santa? What was that? Did you put the medals on the sash, or maybe off to the side? I don't know. I'm not really sure. So I'm confused as between the sashes that we give to Boy Scouts and diplomats, and I guess pageant contestants as well, the pageant winners, who wear those Miss Watermelon Seed sashes or whatever you get these days. Oh, hey, speaking of beauty pageant contestants, I know that was in my Twitter timeline from yesterday. I guess there's a new story, or a new take on, I guess essentially a new take on an old story. Let's see, did I put that in pocket? Did I deem that important enough to put in pocket, or just ridiculous and titillating enough to put in my Twitter timeline? I think the answer is Twitter timeline. So we'll scroll back a little bit. I recall seeing it last night. Do I need to go to the replies? Anyway, somebody had a new and slightly updated version of the old story of Donald Trump barging in on pageant contestants while they were changing. Yeah, here we are. Whose tweet is this? Olivia Messer. Okay, she is a Daily Beast correspondent, and her tweet last night about this story. The tweet reads, "At one modeling event, Trump allegedly went down a line of women feeling their bodies to guess their dress size," which you could probably just do visually, which is almost as disgusting, but you could do it anyway without the hands. Backstage at a lingerie show. See, again, where are you, Donald Trump? Well, note that it's one modeling event was the first thing, not a beauty pageant per se, which is outdated and silly enough, but a modeling event. One modeling event that takes place is you are modeling. You would be at a fashion show. That's a modeling event. Having your picture taken somewhere is a modeling event, but not what we're talking about here. This is a modeling contest of sorts. And I gather if we read all the way through the story, you'll hear about what kind of creepy situation it is. I think that's actually in the caption for the photo that accompanies the tweet here. Anyway, at one modeling event, he's guessing their dress size, which is also not a required element, I don't think, of a modeling event or any sort of event. You could always simply say, if you needed to know, because, you need to dress them perhaps for a modeling event. What is your size? All right, I have that size for you here. And of course, they're all the same size, so really. Anyway, so at one modeling event, Trump's guessing the dress size with his hands. Then backstage at a lingerie show, which is also not a thing. I mean, it's a thing and they do it, but I mean, it's not a necessary thing either. But is it a fashion show at which the line being exhibited is lingerie? Yeah, I guess, sort of. But I don't know. I'm not certain. Well, what does he need to be there for? He doesn't wear this, so get lost. Okay, he could be buying it for someone else. Whatever. It's really for him anyway. Everything's really for him at bottom. Backstage at a lingerie show, he is said to have moved his hands all over a model's breasts under the guise of inspecting the bra's fabric. I mean, I can't think of anything more teenage-ish in terms of fantasy. But, yeah, I need to know what fabric is that? That's just fabulous. I just have to feel that. Okay, sure, fine. Anyway, that's a new article in Cosmopolitan magazine. I guess we can take how long will this take us what if we took a thorough look at this? Do we really want to do that? I don't know. It's difficult to judge what the best parts of this are. I think we can get all the way through. The best part for me is the photo accompanying the piece is, and remember, this is in Cosmopolitan magazine, which pays a certain amount of attention to style and fashion issues, along with many other things. For instance, it's all right up here in the top bar. Tell you all the important things that they pay attention to: style, beauty, sex, politics. Interestingly enough, that's what we're doing here, I guess, and astrology, which that's an odd mix. But okay, they're marketing. This photo accompanying the piece is of Donald Trump with the teen models at one of these events. And I guess the creepiest part of this whole thing is that these are the teen models he's hanging out with. Not even the sometimes older, like 19 to 21-year-olds in the Miss Universe pageant. Remember, of course, he has the Miss Teen USA. But this is an even creepier event, I think, that he's at. But anyway, here are 4 of the contestants dressed, normally, I think. Actually, dressed rather conservatively for one of these events that he typically finds himself at. And he is Donald Trump dressed to the nines. And you should see this. And they accentuate everything by, I guess, my guess is that the photo is taken in color, but that the women here, because they're just background noise, even in Cosmopolitan, they're treated as background noise. They are in black and white. His image is in color. And what color? He is wearing what I am going to say is sort of a, is that a royal blue or is that too light? I mean, that may be even like a, I don't know, is that like a cerulean blue? Some sort of cobalt blue pair of slacks, I guess you would have to say, old man style, with a white belt. He's also in a white cotton polo style golf shirt, which appears to have a pink collar, and he is wearing a pastel yellow blazer along with it. Oh, and a baseball style golf cap, but like the really super old style one. The old original MAGA hats were made out of the ones you see. And this one too might be one of his Trump golf hats. But I guess this picture was taken before they came up with the dumb looking pseudo-European coat of arms logo for the place. Anyway, it is a white hat, trucker style cap, I would say, with the very rigid front quarter panel and stiff brim and what looks to be either a softer sides or possibly even the mesh. I mean, for really cheapy old man looking kind of thing. So he's considerably younger than he is today in this photo, but he's dressed like some sort of Miami Vice Easter egg hunt motif. I don't know what's going on. But imagine showing up to a fashion event, a quote unquote fashion event, in this sort of style and thinking, Yeah, all the chicks dig this. I can't wait to grope them. I mean, I guess he doesn't care what he looks like. He just wants to grope people. So this is not news in the traditional sense, but it's yucky and gross, and I thought I would update you on what is new here. The new thing is that there's a book. The book is what's new. Barry Levine and Monique El-Faizy, that's E-L-F-A-I-Z-Y, who have put out this new book called All the President's Women, Donald Trump and the Making of a Predator. So, they're on the right track here. Let's see. It says here that this new book, it begins by pointing out, in 2016, President Donald Trump tweeted, nobody has more respect for women than me. That obviously was untrue. Although his sordid history with women has been well documented, to date, at least 25 women have accused the POTUS of sexual misconduct. I believe that number is actually considerably higher now, and I don't know whether this is the book that puts it up there. There was recently a spate of stories about more accusations being leveled, and I was unclear, since we didn't read that, whether they were coming out of this book or some other source. Anyway, yes, he remains in office, seemingly immune to the forces of the Me Too movement, but this new book by Barry Levine and Monique El-Faizy aims to uncover parts of Trump's past that should no longer be ignored, like all of it, really. In the following passages, we learn of Trump's egregious and disturbing misconduct around young women trying to make it in the modeling world in the early 1990s. And that, of course, brings to mind the now famous piece posted over at Daily Kos under the writer's pseudonym of Swedish Jewfish. You remember the whole, we all knew about the trafficking piece. That apparently, by the way, has, come under some sort of fire at Daily Kos, or at least the author has, and I understand that she's had some great difficulty with the community there, and I guess the piece is still up, but I think she's actually gotten into some sort of confrontation with somebody and ended up banned from the site and had to maybe even make special arrangements. I don't know whether she was able to do it or not, to recover the early drafts of her follow-up piece. So that's sad to hear. I never understand what's going on in the community side of things when it comes to individuals who find themselves at odds with someone else in the community. That's not often shared openly, but which is why I don't know anything about it. It's all out of my hands, but it seems sort of disturbing. I thought I should at least note that that's the case. Well, let's see. Lots of fantastic, fun stories about how he made sure that he was always in the way of the teenage models. We'll just run quickly through this. Trump's hands, the size of which would later become the subject of significant public curiosity, were infamous for other reasons back then, according to sources. He was gropey, and he had his hands in the most inappropriate places, always. This is, I guess, the comment of Nakina Carr, the editor's note saying that Nakina was working as a runway model for Oscar de la Renta at the time. When he went in to kiss someone, the hand always went to either the hip or the butt. He was also really good when he did pictures or when he side hugged someone. He'd always get his hand on the boob every time. Congratulations, Mr. President. You're really good at getting stuff done. So just like you said, making America great, gropey, again. Stories about Trump and his hands circulated within the modeling community, and at one modeling event, Trump allegedly went down a line of women feeling their bodies to guess their dress size. Backstage at the lingerie show, there was, of course, the inspection of the bra fabric. That's now, we've already told that story. Another trademark Trump move was honed back in the early 80s. I saw this several times, it says here in a quote from Carr. When he met a girl, he'd immediately move in to kiss her. He'd admitted as much on the Access Hollywood tape, right? Not shake her hand or say, hello, how are you? He'd immediately put his mouth on her. What a way of putting it. Isn't it? Put his mouth on her. Yowza. Let's see. Bill, by the way, making the comment here. You picked something from out of the story here. Among modeling insiders, Trump had a reputation at the time for preferring the younger girls. If you're over 21, you don't have to worry, Carr said she was told. A chip, he says, off the old Epstein. Yeah. Jeffrey liked them even younger, though. Remember, that was his quote. I didn't make it up. He said it. Let's see. I saw him go straight to the mouth, to kiss them on the mouth, and they would turn their cheek. This is the important part and what makes it such a egregious harassment. A lot of them didn't because they knew he was the money man, and it was a way up. And he depended on that. Then, of course, the quote about, hey, don't worry if you're over 21, he's no longer interested. Stacy Wilkes competed in a 1991 Look of the Year contest. I know when we tweeted this around last night, I got a lot of reaction to the idea of there even being a Look of the Year contest. Like, that's not a thing either. What was that? That was Trump and his buddies who he emulated, who owned modeling agencies of their own and used them to prey upon girls and traffic in young girls. And then, of course, he eventually decided to start his own modeling agency for exactly the same purpose. They used to hang out together, and their big excuse was, I guess there's not enough pageants for us to walk in on, so we'll make up this other one called the Look of the Year, which was all about finding a teen or even preteen model who was supposed to be like the new big upcoming look, but really all it was a chance for his modeling impresario buddies to try and molest the girl, and maybe she'd get a contract to do something at some point. Anyway, Stacy Wilkes was 16 years old at the time, 1991, representing the United States. She remembers Trump coming into their dressing area during the contest more than once. I would feel really uncomfortable because every time we would change, it was like Trump would find a reason to come backstage and see all the teenagers, she told us. When you're doing a runway show, they have to strip you down and change you. There was no need for him to be back there. Trump never tried to justify his presence backstage, but would just walk in and start making jokes. He's hilarious. The girls didn't feel they were free to complain. We were afraid to say anything bad when he was around because we didn't want anything to hurt our chances of winning, Wilkes said. And by way of backing that statement up, she points out we were all young teenagers. Wilkes' roommate ended up spending the night with one of the celebrity judges, Wilkes said, and later won one of the prizes. An immediate payoff. Fantastic. A quid pro quo, if you will. Models report similar things happening during the competition the following year. Shauna Lee was only 14. Yeesh. When she was the entrant from Canada, in other words, international trafficking, in the 1992 Look of the Year contest. She also attended an event on a yacht, which is exactly where you want to put your 14-year-olds. I wonder who came up with that one. This time, the girls were asked to walk one by one down a staircase and dance in front of Trump and John Casablancas, who you'll remember from we all knew about the trafficking article and series. He was the owner of the Elite modeling agency, now deceased. Casablancas, essentially a noted predator of young girls, and I believe he may actually have gotten himself in legal trouble doing that as well. Also managed, as I recall, to spend some time toward the end of his career in South America as a Trump condo sales agent, along with Paolo Zampoli, who followed the same trajectory, exact same businesses, modeling impresario, and then selling Trump condos in South America. Very odd. Anyway, imagine that. So you got a yacht from which people can't dive and swim to shore, for instance, yacht full of 14-year-olds, and they have to come down a staircase one by one and dance in front of you as you're seated next to another noted pervert. And that's the contest. That's the Look of the Year contest, everybody. It was a very small area, and I could see them laughing and making fun of the girls on top of all of this. This guy, I mean, did anyone not hate him before the show? Right, okay. Anyway, men who were, most of the girls rather, who were 15 or 16 years old. According to Shauna Lee, who said this for an interview for the book, these men were older than my father at the time, looking girls up and down and objectifying them. That happens a lot. It was just kind of gross. I don't think doing that had anything to do with being a professional model. Well, I mean, it was actually part and parcel of being a professional model because professional modeling was run by trafficking perverts. So, I mean, it's not supposed to have anything to do with professional modeling, but it does. Lee told us that Trump wandered around the dressing room before the runway show. I was thinking, what's that old guy doing back here? She said. I was changing and looked up, and he was looking and doing a slow stroll by, checking out the girls. This is an interesting story over here. I know you've heard all this stuff before in different forms. Dressing rooms weren't the only places where Trump barged in on women. This is an interesting tidbit. In the early 1990s, a world-famous supermodel had flown to New York to attend a fashion event and was staying in a suite at the Plaza Hotel. That would be the Trump Plaza Hotel back in the early 90s. She was seeing another industry insider, of course, and they had gone back to her room. The two were in bed together. I guess unbeknownst to Donald Trump, he just figured, well, this is, I have this famous supermodel staying at the Plaza, my Plaza Hotel, my hotel. So what does he do? They're in bed together when they heard the door open, according to the man, who gave an interview for this book requesting anonymity because both he and the supermodel still work in the industry and fear retribution. Thinking it was housekeeping, the pair sat up in bed and hollered that they didn't need anything. A few seconds later, the door to the bedroom opened. It's Donald Trump standing there. It's Donald standing there, the man said in his interview. Trump had let himself in. The supermodel and her companion were stunned. He owned the hotel, you see, so he just told the front desk, I don't know whether he needed their help in getting a key. I don't remember how it was back in the early 90s, but he had a master key of some kind. I found out that there's a supermodel staying in my hotel. I'm going to go into her bedroom. Imagine that. I mean, that's absurd. That's really crazy. I mean, that's way over the line. I said, what the hell are you doing? The man said, we're naked, so she pulled up the covers and we're freaked out. I couldn't believe it. He looks in the room and he took a good look at both of us and he slammed the door really hard, like in anger. And that really pissed me off, that he came in and slammed the door with this arrogant attitude. I guess, imagine that. He was angry because she had a companion in her bed already and he thought he was going to sneak into there. The two threw clothes on and ran out after Trump. It's a rare thing to try to actually hold him accountable for this. Arriving just as his elevator was leaving, they grabbed the next elevator and rushed into the lobby. Trump was already in the middle of the crowd talking to people. I was livid, the man said. She's hysterical, crying, and I went to him, and just as I was about to grab him, of course that's not going to work, right? His bodyguard jumped in between us and pushed me back. I was screaming at him, what the F are you doing coming into my room? It was a scene. While the bodyguard was trying to push the man away, Trump approached, and he says to him, I mean, it's a morning show, everybody, but this is what he says. I hate sloppy seconds, Trump said. It was loud enough for her to hear, the man said. Like that was going to happen. I was going to just walk in and have sex because I'm Donald Trump and you're a supermodel. Like she's holding onto my arm and trying to pull me away too. And she heard him and she had the courage to say to him, you effing bastard. Not like it made the papers though. So we walk away. We got shoved back into the elevator, he recounted. Later, back in their room, the supermodel revealed to her companion that Trump had gotten her phone number from her agent and had been calling her for weeks. She had repeatedly rebuffed him, and then it dawned on us that had I not been in the room, it would have been a scene. That's a euphemism for a rape, I guess. The man said she wanted nothing to do with him. So that's another amazing Donald Trump sexual predation story. Sex pest Donald Trump, as Atrios usually puts it. Really rather amazing. I was not really expecting I'll take a master key for the hotel because I own it and just kick the door down on supermodels when I find out that they're staying in my hotel. About everything you could possibly imagine happening at a Trump hotel if there were no rules and the guy felt accountable to no one. And now he's president of the United States. It's only getting better. Okay, so there's real news out there as well, besides this retread plus new angles on old Trump sexual predation. For instance, as it happens, we usually tell everybody when Canadian holidays are happening because they're on my calendar. Canadian Election Day was not on my calendar, but that happened yesterday. Brian Monroe has let us know. I found that out last night as I saw actual American news outlets telling us what was happening politically in Canada. And it appears that Justin Trudeau is headed to another term, I guess, as Prime Minister. From what I saw, it looked like the Liberal Party won enough seats to keep him in place, but didn't have any kind of spectacular night. And as Brian notes for us, Trudeau will win or be able to put together a minority government. So, I have no insight on exactly what went on up there, but I guess for the moment, we don't have to learn the name of a new prime minister in Canada if that's something you try to keep up with. So, good news there, I think, in general, though I would leave it to our Canadian friends to tell us whether they really consider that to be good news. By the way, our other Canadian friend, one of our other, we have many Canadian friends, but one of our more vocal Canadian friends, and we thank her very much, Ricky, our Kanakistani, as she says, points out for us, since I was talking about the robes and the wigs, Canadian lawyers still wear robes in court. Is it cold? That's why. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with being a former British colony. It's colder in Canada, and you got to wear a robe. Bathrobes, in fact, they wear terry cloth bathrobes, just like the kind that Donald Trump swears he doesn't own any of, but was later found to be have been photographed in just such a robe. But he lies about everything. That's been subject of some discussion as well today. By the way, I guess there's still a cadre of journalists and commentators only just now coming to the realization that they should be saying out loud that Donald Trump lies all the time. I did happen to see somebody finally catch on to one of his many tells years after the fact. But we'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show here on Networks Radio. I found that I did not put anything away on the Canadian elections. I think I thought I would wait for the morning and grab all the well-informed front page articles from our major papers of record. Not that they didn't provide it, but I didn't get a chance to look, as it turns out, but perhaps I can review the news on these things and perhaps something I can discuss with Greg a bit tomorrow. But, apologies for not being up to speed on what's happening in the Canadian elections. I really thought that it would be much more readily available to me. And Ricky is telling me here, the Liberal Party won a minority, so it's possible that we could have another election before the 5-year term is up. I understand that much about parliamentary systems in general and British-derived parliamentary systems. That is to say, I did not, that wasn't, a thought I had already had about the Canadian elections, but rather I understand what you mean. We could have elections again before the next 5-year term is up. I guess things could begin to collapse, withdrawal of support from coalition partners, etc., the threat of a vote of no confidence, etc., should anything happen. And I guess anything can happen in the age of Trump. But hopefully everything stays relatively stable and you're able to hold things together up there, at least in one of the English-speaking North American countries should remain stable. Though I know you also have to do that in French, which is difficult enough. To remain stable in English alone is difficult as tasks go. Now, I'm reminded also by our other select international correspondents that there's more happening around the world. We haven't discussed the unrest, the street protest now arising in Chile, if I have my facts correct, or for that matter, 5 or 6 other countries around the world. But Chile, I think, is the latest to go up in flames in that way. And every time a new country experiences this sort of street protest, everyone wonders whether or when that will begin to happen in the United States as well. But we have a huge history of ignoring what street protest we do get, even when it's of significant size here in this country. But anyway, there's new news internationally. Parleo, our you're an English expat or British anyway, I think, living in depending on who you ask, Spain or Catalonia. And as you are likely aware, there's the Catalan independence movement out there, seeking independence from Spain, and that becomes an issue. He has sent me this tweet saying that he's got no idea whether or not I've talked about Catalonia at all, but this story may interest me, and his brief synopsis of the story which he has sent us to read. U.S. citizen facing deportation and extreme charges for taking part in a demonstration there. It could do with some visibility in the U.S., he says, and sends it on for our review. I think we should indulge him on this and indulge our own curiosity about what's going on around the world, because an American is involved, and we have to get, that's how we get our interest raised here. Something's happening in another country. There's another country, for instance, we sometimes say to ourselves, yes, and there's an American who is in that country who is in trouble, and therefore you need to pay attention to this story, and it's actually true. So what am I looking at here? The English version of the Catalan site VilaWeb has this story, which there's an ownership interest in this story. It's called Eric's story. It's about Eric, you see. Eric's story, an American resident faces deportation over a Catalan pro-independence flag. He was arrested by Spanish police in Barcelona, or as they like to say in Madrid anyway, Barcelona, and is now accused of terrorism, jihadism, and human trafficking, because you should accuse everyone, I think, of human trafficking, and you're probably going to be right about 60% of the time. I don't know whether that's the case here. The implication is that it is not. But let's see. We've got this story. Oh, the byline here. Is that right? Yes, Montserrat Serra. That's not where it was written. That's the name. Is this the name of the author? Is that right? Okay. Not used to that as a proper name there. But okay. Our story, let's skip that, because some of this website, though the text is in English, the directions and the designations of what I'm looking at are still in, I assume, Catalan here. And I don't always get along in Catalan. Eric, though, is a 42-year-old American citizen. I gather this is not Eric Trump. He has been living in Catalonia for 14 years, speaks excellent Catalan, could help me with this website, and is married to a Catalan woman named Elna. They have a young daughter. Eric works for an American company in the tourism industry. Makes good sense. He lives in El Masnou. Is that right? Masnou? Masnou? M-A-S-N-O-U. Masnou. Masnou. Boy. I'll have to work on that one. He's a member of Teillas Local Giants Club. You'll have to tell me what that's about. On the day of the general strike in Catalonia, Eric was arrested by Spanish police when he demanded to have his pro-independence Estelada flag returned to him after the officers found it in his pocket and seized it. I guess that's something they're very sensitive about. For this reason, he stands accused of terrorism, which doesn't seem right, jihadism, which is difficult to establish, is he Muslim? I don't know. It doesn't say. Eric. It just tells me his name is Eric. His name could give that away if we knew the whole name. Terrorism, or it could be that the officialdom there considers terrorism and jihadism to be the same thing. Human trafficking, I'm not real sure about where they came up with that one. And of course, because of all these things, he's facing deportation. In addition, they are pressing criminal charges against him, and you would think terrorism, right? And he will be prosecuted for public disorder. The police claim he was in possession of 2 large metal nuts, which he was carrying wrapped up in his flag. Eric categorically denies it. He and his wife believe it is an attempt to intimidate foreign residents, to scare them and discourage them from supporting Catalonia's independence cause. But they are not willing to keep quiet, and this is their story. I guess they were afraid he was going to wrap those nuts up in the flag and hit people with them. And boy, that sounds awful when you just read it out of context, doesn't it? Well, still, if they were metal nuts, which they take pains to point out is what they were, I guess that could be a dangerous weapon. No comment on the rest. On Friday, October 18th, the day of the general strike in Catalonia, we missed that one, Eric attended the Barcelona demonstration with a group of friends. They were on Passeig de Gracia, and at the end of the march, they went down to, it's going to be full of Catalonian place names, and all right. They went down to Via Laietana, my best guess, to see what was going on. It was crowded, and he and the rest of the group got separated. He went into Hotel Mont Blanc, looking for a safe place, and there he served as a go-between with the hotel's manager and helped young people and others who were looking for shelter in the hotel because they were afraid of the Spanish police and the rubber bullets they were firing outside. Eric rang his wife from the hotel to tell her that he would try to find a way to get back to his car and drive home. I was leaving Hotel Mont Blanc at, they use the 24-hour clock there, so 20:15, so we're talking about, a quarter after 8 p.m., when the police stopped me. They frisked me and seized the Estelada flag I was carrying in my pocket. Interesting that they even knew it was there. I had it folded up and put it away because I was going home. I told them that's not really a respectful way of carrying your flag home, but I guess if it's an illegal flag, that's one way of doing it. I told them I opposed violence and violent people, but they rebuked me and said, not only did I rebuke thee. Then they said, as an American, what are you doing carrying this flag? That's an interesting question. What would you do if Texas attempted to break away? I might let it. You'd better be on your way before things get any worse. Like now they're trying to, shame us about, how dare you? You once had a civil war. You must know how we feel about that stuff here. Well, that doesn't translate, so to speak. Anyway, where do we leave off? Oh, yes. I asked them to return my flag and why they were keeping it. I told them that it was like stealing and it was wrong. Then they pushed me and I instinctively grabbed one of the officers by the arm. Bad instinct, usually, with officers. And we both fell to the ground. Oh, boy. The surveillance video isn't going to look good. They restrained me and got me down on my knees. I was handcuffed and taken to the Spanish police station on Via Laietana. I was under arrest. That's what it sounds like. The next section is called, I didn't get beaten up because I'm an American. How lucky. Eric's story goes on. When we got to the precinct, I saw 2 girls there. One was in tears. She had seen Donald Trump, apparently. They split them up. Later on, they brought in more people who had been arrested. One of them had blood all over his head, but they still threw him against the floor while in handcuffs. They gave him a good kicking. They also brought in a photojournalist who was treated very roughly. Everyone was hurt badly. They were pushed against the wall and had boots pressed against their ankles. I saw some horrible stuff. Hatred was palpable among the officers. One came up to me and whispered in my ear, all this over a flag. Was it worth it? I suppose you could ask the Spanish police the same question, huh? I didn't reply. They didn't hurt me. I believe I didn't get beaten up because I'm an American. That's right. How would you feel if Texas tried to separate? How would you feel if Spanish police beat up American citizens? That's the job of American police. You know, we don't want all you Spanish police coming in and taking all the American policemen's jobs, you know. We're against that sort of thing here under this administration. By midnight, they'd made enough arrests. There were about 10 of us, and we were driven to the police station on Rambla de, oh my goodness, Guipúzcoa. How about that? Rambla de Guipúzcoa. Best guess. I was put in a cell by myself. Then I got a bad migraine. I suffer from migraines and whenever I get one, I feel like I've been battered. Luckily, you didn't actually get battered on top of all of that. They didn't allow me to call my wife until 4:30 in the morning. We spoke for a couple of minutes. I didn't see my lawyer. And of course, they have to tell us who's the lawyer. Solange Hilbert. Just so we know. Until 1:30 in the afternoon. She works for Ayacta, a cooperative law firm. Outside, my wife was doing everything she could. This is getting absurd. I was taken to Ciutat de la Justicia between 6 and 7 in the afternoon and gave a statement in court. That's when I found out that the police claimed I was carrying 2 large nuts wrapped in the flag. I really wish you had gone with 3 or something just to make things clearer, but okay. But I oppose violence and violent people. Well, a lot of people say they do. The story of the nuts is totally made up. That's nuts, you could say. I've been charged with public disorder and they want to deport me. They've kept my mobile phone. I'm not allowed to go anywhere near a political march, and I am expected to turn up in court every 2 weeks until the date of the trial. That's actually not a bad system when you have a guilty person in your hands. Meanwhile, Eric's wife, Elna, reported him as a missing person to the Catalan police after she hadn't heard from him for 6 hours. When Eric rang her at 4:30 in the morning, she took their daughter and rushed to the police precinct on Rambla de Guipúzcoa. We know where it was. He didn't have to make me repeat it. Elna explains that when Eric gets a migraine, he is unable to speak or hear. He is physically sick. It's really awful. I rushed to get him his pills. When I got to the police station, they wouldn't let me see him and refused to let me give him his medication. They wouldn't even tell me what he was being charged with. Later, I found out that besides public disorder, he also stands accused of terrorism, jihadism, and human trafficking, which are the only charges that can justify his expulsion from the country. That's it. I rang the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, and later the Barcelona consulate got in touch. They were good and have taken some steps. Our lawyer says the charges hold no water, but neither did the indictments against Jordi Sanchez and another Jordi, Cuixart, I'm guessing. Cuixart. Any idea for me there? And they've ended up in jail, the 2 Jordis. Eric might be barred from entering the country for 5 years just for asking to have his flag back. Elna adds that now we have 15 days to enter a plea. The Giants Club, the Parents Association at school, the Council of Masno, our church, they've all written letters explaining that Eric is a family man, a member of the local community. I cannot believe what's happened to him. Eric has witnessed uncalled for violence and humiliation. They want to frighten us, but we are not afraid, and we want people to know what's happened to us because it is the only way to prevent it from happening again. We can't, it's not a very effective way of preventing it, but it is perhaps the only way. We can't keep quiet about it, and we don't want to. All right. Well, there's clearly more to be heard about that story, but I thought it was a great idea to bring it to our attention. These are things that do happen around the world, and I guess more evidence that this is a worldwide phenomenon. The authoritarianism and right-wing assertion of fascism and use of fascist tactics around the world, across Europe. And some would say, if they weren't intimidated into backing off of accusations about Russia these days, that it was perhaps all part of at least a loose Putin plan and creating chaos wherever possible. But interesting in that ordinarily I would think that the Russians would perhaps be more interested in fostering, and then they could do both, I guess, fostering both Catalan separatism and Spanish authoritarianism. There's no reason why they couldn't just play both sides of the fence, and maybe they are. All right, let's see. Where are we now? Some interesting news that we'll probably get around to discussing a little bit with Joan McCarter tomorrow, but brought to my attention here by Kate Sherrill, who brings me the tweet of Kristen Clark. Kristen Clark, let's see, how does she identify herself? President and Executive Director at the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Okay. And she tweeting about Trump judicial nominee Stephen Menashe, I guess, whose name is still under consideration for a federal judgeship, pointing out that in college, this Menashe character defended a fraternity that threw a ghetto party. What a fun guy. Menashe said the event was harmless and unimportant. People at the party wore afro wigs and carried toy guns. Now he's up for a lifetime judgeship, as is written up over at Vox by Ian Millhiser. The controversy over ethno-nationalism and a Trump judicial nominee explained. It's actually an article from back in September. I've heard the name called before. And are we on track for a vote for him in the next few days? Or perhaps today? Maybe that's what brings this back into the news. Not much we can do to put a stop to it, of course, but well worth taking note of, and perhaps a subject for discussion with Joan tomorrow. All right. Just keeping an eye on things. Thanks, Kate, for sending that along. Oh, more from Parleo here. Here's some Giants clubs for our interest, used in parades. Okay. That helps. A little bit almost New Orleans-ish here, right? What looks like giant puppets of sorts for use in parades, clearly of religious origin, but weird and creepy looking, and they're more than life size. I see there's a human in there for size comparison. They are indeed giant, and I guess these are civic clubs that build, maintain, and use these figures for local parades. I get the idea. Also of some interest. Yes, that's true. Thank you for pointing that out. Parleo pointing out, by the way, the Spanish government using these tactics against this American citizen living in Catalonia is a center-left socialist government that happens to be overseeing this crazy crackdown, as he points out. So an excellent point there. Authoritarian probably was as far as I should have gone then with that, but we associate those authoritarian police tactics more often, I think, with, well, especially for Spain, which had an actual fascist government for many years, we very often will associate them with fascism. But as the right wing here in the United States and elsewhere love to point out, there is, of course, a special brand of leftist, socialist, communist, for instance, like Stalinist authoritarianism as well. So, authoritarianism covers things nicely. And again, it does make a certain amount of sense that the Russians, if they wanted to play in Spain, and I don't know whether they are or not, would probably do so by playing both sides of that fence. Their interest would be more in fomenting contentious political upheaval. That would be, they would have an interest in feeding the Catalonian independence movement, and probably also in supporting the Spanish crackdown on it, just so that tensions remained high, I guess, if we had to speculate about what role they might play in something like that. All right. That's our international news for the moment, although there is more, actually. Pardon me, I'm really getting choked up at this. It's the emotion of it all. You know how emotionally invested I am in Catalan independence. I'm not, but of course. But I'm fascinated by it. And it's always worth being reminded what's going on in some of these hot spots around the world, particularly when they're taking place in Western Europe, which we think of these days as such a relatively stable environment. And meanwhile, here we have the ongoing Catalan independence movement. That's been a long time in coming. But more recently, Brexit, of course, shaking things up. And here, another interesting piece. Not sure how this one came to me through Twitter, but I grabbed it when I saw it. From a Twitter account called Brexit Bin. This is the account of a British expat migrant living between Germany and the UK. Tweets on the current state of Brexit. He tweets, they tweet along the results of a nationwide Swiss referendum. This has great, I think, implications for Britain and Brexit and how it will approach things, and really for all of us. The result of a nationwide Swiss referendum from 2016, of all years, was overturned for the first time in modern history in the courts. What do you think about that? The Swiss Supreme Court, which, by the way, doubles as a knife, a fork, and a spoon, which is not even something I knew courts could do, but you know how they are, the Swiss. The Swiss Supreme Court voided the result, which had been just over 50% in favor of passage of whatever the hell this thing was. I don't know what it was. We're going to have to read the article to figure it out. But a narrow decision, 50.8% to 49.2% for this thing, which if I was European, I would know probably right away. But the important thing is that they overturned the result of the referendum on the grounds, and have demanded a rerun of the referendum, by the way, on the grounds that voters were not given full information. Sound like something that might be applicable to Brexit or any number of things here in the United States as well. I know I did see a fantastic clip yesterday of somebody, interview of woman on the street with regard to, I guess I saw it on Sunday, with regard to whether or not there ought to be a new referendum on Brexit. And I don't know whether the interviewer actually felt this way or was just playing devil's advocate, but pressed this woman and saying, well, what is this? We're just going to have referendum after referendum until you get the results you want? Why should we not live by the results of this referendum? Which is, that's a question people are posing all the time. But she actually deflated it pretty easily and just said, well, that's not even a decent argument. I mean, should we just stop having elections and not take the pulse of the electorate every couple of years? We actually put it just, I guess, by way of making a metaphor. Should we never play another World Cup? Well, we already have an international football champion. We never have to contest that again. Democracy, as she pointed out, is an ongoing process. And you should take the pulse of the electorate frequently. And certainly every couple of years wouldn't be excessive, right? We have general elections all the time. What's the point of saying we shouldn't have another referendum? Good point. Well, the Swiss are going to have another one because the Swiss Supreme Court / knife and fork, toothpick, tweezers, and scissors say they have to because the electorate weren't decently informed this first time around. Now, the BBC News reporting on it will probably tell me what the hell this whole thing is all about. The result of a nationwide referendum has been overturned for the first time in modern Switzerland's history. They're going to put the holes back in the cheese, I think. The poll, held in February 2016, asked the country's voters whether married couples and cohabiting partners should pay the same tax. Interesting question. Voters rejected the proposal with 50.8% against and 49.2% in favor. So they weren't paying. I don't know whose taxes were supposed to go up or down in order to equalize this thing, but without getting into the details of it, because I don't know what they are, the Swiss people decided, but I guess based on faulty information, according to the Supreme Court, which has now voided the result on the grounds that voters were not given full information and the vote must be rerun. The information provided to the electorate was incomplete, in quotes it says, and therefore, quote, violated the freedom of the vote, unquote. the court ruled. Well, we'd never get anything done here. Switzerland's direct democracy system frequently allows citizens to take part in decision-making. During the referendum campaign, the Swiss government told voters just 80,000 of married couples were paying more tax than couples living together. I see. So I guess that was to try and persuade people to reject this proposal that very few people are actually paying this tax difference, but I guess that's not really true. The true figure was almost 500,000, the government later said. Not 80,000, but almost 500,000. So that I guess could color things a little bit, right? Keeping in mind the close result and the severe nature of the irregularities, I wonder if they talk at all about where that figure came from and why they think it was offered up. But the close result and the severe nature of the irregularities, it is possible that the outcome of the ballot could have been different, the court's statement says. Which, by the way, they yodel from the bench. They tell you what the court's decision is, which is unique, I think, to Switzerland. I don't know whether they have wigs or not, but I like that each country has its own judicial practice this way. None of this part is true, actually. The Christian Democratic Party lodged an appeal against the result in June of 2018, disputing the accuracy of the government's statistics. Very interesting. Welcoming the court's decision, the party said the ruling was a boost for the political rights of Swiss voters. In contrast, those who oppose the ruling argue it could undermine Switzerland's political system. That sounds bad. Paving the way for frivolous appeals against referendums. Under the Swiss system of direct democracy, a proposal needs 100,000 signatures before going to a referendum. So not an easy hurdle to clear, I assume, although everyone's probably carrying pens or knives that convert into pens, so it's easy. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Just taking a brief break to regroup. Hope we haven't offended our huge group of Swiss listeners, like Swiss Listener Instant Cocoa is brought to you by... okay, I mean, do we have any more Switzerland jokes that we can make? Fondue, Ricola, yodeling we did, Matterhorn, Heidi, I don't know. What else have we got here? I think we've covered it all. If you can think of more, let us know. Love the Swiss, the banking system, fantastic. Nice cheese. I don't eat cheese, generally speaking, but I've heard it's pretty good. Even there are even effete northeastern elite liberals like John Kerry who like it on their cheesesteaks, which is perfectly legitimate as far as I'm concerned. But I guess that's really it. I think we're out of Swiss stuff at this point. But I kid you. I love the Swiss. They're fantastic people. I don't know. Anyway, that's very interesting. Just good to know that there are international precedents anyway out there for undoing stupid referenda results when it's become obvious that a super close result may have been tampered with through providing incomplete or inaccurate information to the electorate. That's one of the problems of direct democracy, I guess. If you can feed false information reliably to a large part of the voting population, you can screw things up pretty badly. I'm looking at you, Facebook. Somehow I believe they're behind this. They may not be. But okay, let's see. What else have we here? Man, there's an awful lot happening that we have to catch up on. Let's see. Over in Pocket, I knew there was also another interesting story here that we should share. One or two that are not entirely new, but offer some interesting new angles. And let's see. In the new angle aspect, there is a book out from... I guess John Mattis, former Secretary of Defense, has got a book out as well, which appears to be more or less co-written, if not ghost-written. Guy Snodgrass is the former chief speechwriter for Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. He's the author of, he's just straight up the author of Holding the Line Inside Trump's Pentagon with Secretary Mattis, from which this article is adapted. So it's not Mattis who has the book out, it's Guy Snodgrass. You don't know who Guy Snodgrass is, except in the context that he was chief speechwriter for Jim Mattis. I said John Mattis. I don't know why. I'm looking to forget the whole thing, I guess. But this excerpt is in Politico under the title of Inside Trump's First Pentagon Briefing. What I saw there that foretold the coming rift between Mattis and the president and today's foreign policy crises. It gives us some insight into things that are going on here and some additional detail to stories that we have heard before that I thought might make an interesting bit to share today. Long before real planning for it began, the excerpt begins, and long before the first news stories about it, those of us in the top levels at the Pentagon heard President Donald Trump demand the military parade he would eventually get. Remember that? The bizarre request was one of the first signs I had of the enormous rift between my boss at the time, Defense Secretary James Mattis, and the president. The clash came in the middle of Trump's first Pentagon briefing on America's military and diplomatic laydown. And that in quotes there. What is laydown? It's a term of art used to describe all of the locations around the world with U.S. forces and embassies on July 20th, 2017. It's not that the term is only used that day. It's just awkward the way it came out. Mattis, for whom I was working as chief speechwriter, so you would think I would do better with that phrasing, had hoped the briefing would educate Trump, that's dumb, on the United States' longstanding commitment to the rest of the world. That is not at all what happened. And you can use that as additional background to Trump's comments yesterday, which is where I think we'll go next, in a unusually stupid and I don't know. It was populated with an enormous amount of stupid comments. Press availability that he had yesterday as he let the press in to watch one of his stupid cabinet meetings, which began with praying to God, thanking him so much. It's a hymn in their version. For the miracle of Donald Trump, et cetera, et cetera. And one of those things where everybody goes around the table and says good things about Trump, and then he rambles about whatever's on his mind for the rest of the press availability. And he said an extraordinary amount of very, very dumb and offensive things yesterday. One of which was that the United States has no obligation to defend the Kurds and never did. Of course, talking about that in the context of the Syria operations. And I guess this would have foreshadowed that. Mattis was hoping to educate Trump on the United States' longstanding commitment to people all over the rest of the world. And it never caught on with him. Instead, the president burst out in the middle of the meeting. "I just returned from France," he said, which everybody probably knew. "Did you see President Macron's handshake?" He asked no one in particular. "He wouldn't let go. He just kept holding on. I spent 2 hours at Bastille Day. Very impressive." He didn't spend the 2 hours because Macron's handshake went on that long. But remember, in those days, there was actual overt competition between Trump and world leaders whom he was greeting about who could shake whose hand more vigorously and crush the other one. And that was a thing. And Macron had been briefed on it and knew how to react. I was going to say appropriately, but it's just inappropriate. But I guess for the specific case of Donald Trump, maybe it is actually an appropriate thing to do. Anyway, he paused after saying that, very impressive about the Bastille Day thing. "I want a victory day, just like Veterans Day. The 4th of July is too hot," he said, apparently out of nowhere. "I want vehicles and tanks on Main Street," which of course there's no Main Street in Washington, D.C. Then he realized he was talking about Pennsylvania Avenue. "On Pennsylvania Avenue, from the Capitol to the White House. We need spirit." Of course, there were many reasons why that doesn't happen. We learned all about the logistics of it. 4th of July somehow is too hot. I want tanks and vehicles and sharks and alligators and spikes on the top. I wish we had somebody who would raise the pitch on that and put some filter on him and make him look ridiculous. If only someone had videotaped that. Anyway, that's what he says. We need spirit. We should blow everybody away with this parade. The French had an amazing parade on Bastille Day with tanks and everything. Why can't we do that? Those of us in the control room linked to the Pentagon conference room shifted uncomfortably, shooting glances at each other. Where was this going? We'd opened the control room door 30 minutes before to improve airflow. A Secret Service agent poked his head in, apparently uncomfortable with the conversation and the light it cast on the president. Hey, he asked, do you guys still need to be in here? By the way, what business is it of his? Interesting that a Secret Service agent would do that. It was far from what Mattis had expected as he prepared meticulously for the meeting just hours before. As the seconds ticked down, Mattis's nervous energy had been palpable, unusually so. Normally stoic and deliberate with his movements, this morning he was electrified. He was pacing in his office in the Pentagon, moving from a standing desk that faced the Potomac to the small circular table and back again. He shuffled his notes, putting them into a nondescript dark blue folder, pausing for a few seconds in hesitation before pulling them out again to rearrange their order. Things needed to be perfect. He was taking the job seriously, you see, and he worked for a bumbling idiot who had no idea what he was doing. It never mattered. Anyway, I understood why he was nervous. We all did. At any time, this briefing would be a big deal for the department. Any other time, really, I guess is what he meant, regardless of the president. But in Trump's case, the briefing had a heightened importance. Just a few weeks earlier, Trump had declared America's unilateral withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. He was also threatening to dismantle the nuclear deal with Iran, withdraw from NATO, pull U.S. forces back from South Korea, Germany, and Japan, give Russia a pass on its electoral interference in the 2016 election, and in his spare time, start a war with North Korea. In private, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Mattis feared these actions signaled America's diminished authority, as a world leader, and emboldened China, Russia, and Iran to fill the vacuum. They felt incredible pressure to educate the president, believing that if only Trump could be made to recognize the value of American allies and the stability afforded by the presence of our troops, he'd reconsider and alter course. Oh well. If anyone could change the president's mind, it was Mattis. He had maintained a close relationship with Trump since he was confirmed in early 2017, visiting the White House 2 or 3 times a week for meetings, lunch, and sometimes dinner. He loves the meals, does Trump. It was obvious to us that Trump valued Mattis's opinion and simply liked having him around to bounce ideas off. I suspect Trump also liked that as far as cabinet members go, Mattis was about as low-key as a senior official could get. He was careful not to seek the spotlight and minimized his interaction with the press, explaining, if I say 6 and the president says half a dozen, I guarantee you the article the next day is going to be the Secretary of Defense and the President disagree on the fundamentals. Well, they very often did, and those articles are largely correct, particularly for this president. The plan for the briefing, which, by the way, hold on a moment. Things just getting worse here. There is, it brings to mind a story I saw on Twitter this morning and relayed from the Military Times, a publication with which I am not necessarily familiar, but I guess you get the theme of it anyway. The Military Times says, in contradiction to what the current Secretary of Defense said on behalf of the president, that troops withdrawn from Syria would be moving across the border into Iraq and continuing their anti-ISIS operations into Syria from Iraq. We now hear from Iraqi authorities, no, they're not. The troops moving there, I guess, can stay there temporarily, perhaps, but are not authorized by the government of Iraq to remain there, much less to operate across the border into Syria from their territory. So, great plan from our dotard president, who evacuated the troops from Syria. And by the way, they had to evacuate to the east because they couldn't go west, because what was in the way of us in the west? Our NATO ally and the bases from which many of these operations were originally dispatched and supplied in Turkey. but you know how it is with Turkey these days. So our troops went for respite from the NATO ally that was shelling us to Iraq, looking for a little peace and quiet, but I guess they didn't get it. So there you have it. Left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing, and probably not caring very much either. Now back to the Snodgrass piece here. The plan for the briefing was for Mattis to speak first, walking Trump through details on every U.S. military deployment abroad, demonstrating America's return on investment. Tillerson would follow with slides on U.S. embassies and missions abroad. National Economic Council Director Gary Cohn would speak last to highlight the importance of global trade flows. It's a comprehensive kind of briefing, huh? I would be in an adjoining control room, watching, listening, and running the slideshow. The lead organizer for the briefing, I arrived hours early to ensure everything was ready before setting up shop in the control room. The president, however, was running a few minutes behind, which only added to the tension. When Trump's motorcade finally pulled up, Mattis greeted the president at his armored limo, known as the Beast. They posed for a quick photo. Reporters shouted questions, to which the president simply replied, "We're doing very well against ISIS. ISIS is falling fast." That worked. Before Mattis whisked him into the entryway and to the conference room. Trump stood at the head of the table, facing 3 large television screens. Ooh, he must have liked that one. He was joined by Vice President Mike Pence, Tillerson, Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, and Senior Advisor, believe it or not, Jared Kushner. Seated to his left were Mattis, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Joe Dunford, and Cohn. Notably absent, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster. Sitting with the backbenchers, or senior officials who sit in chairs along the walls of the room, was Steve Bannon. Trump took his place at the head of the table with a frown fixed on his face. Offering few greetings to anyone, he sat with his arms crossed, refusing to look at Mattis. To me, it seemed that his mind was already made up. He appeared to see this entire briefing as pointless, but perhaps I was reading too much into all of this. At least I hoped so. As planned, Mattis kicked off the meeting with remarks we had rehearsed in his office a number of times. Mattis tends to turn professional during important meetings, providing the audience with excessive detail, rather than tailoring his approach to the group he's speaking with. This instinct worsens when he's anxious about an event, and he will spend an inordinate amount of time on tactical details that have little bearing on strategic outcomes in order to bolster his confidence level. Understandable. Unfortunately, to the room, his opening sounded too much like a lecture. Trump scowled. Mattis worked through his first slide about choke points, extremely narrow, landlocked corridors between larger bodies of water. He then shared his philosophical view about America's 2 fundamental powers of intimidation and inspiration, telling the president a story I'd heard many times before. Years before, a terrorist had attempted to kill then 2-star General Mattis with an improvised explosive device. Marines notified Mattis that they had captured the terrorist as he was trying to place the device on the road Mattis frequently traveled, using 2 155mm mortar rounds, a car battery, and a detonator. Not the terrorist's finest day. As Mattis told me during a meeting in his office, the terrorist realized as he stared down the rifle barrels pointed at him that he was in danger of losing his 401k. Okay, I guess that's a great joke for those guys. Mattis decided to speak with the terrorist after he was apprehended. Once in a holding room, Mattis slid a cup of coffee across the table to help break the ice as he sat down. Ultimately, the terrorist wanted to know, "Do you think if I'm really good at Guantanamo, they will let me move to America after I'm released?" As Mattis told it, the story represents 2 fundamental powers. We can intimidate others through our military superiority, but America's power to inspire is every bit as, and perhaps even more, powerful. Interesting, but not really what I take away from the story, but I get the point. Mattis continued with his briefing, walking through in exacting detail the force ratios in each major geographic location. He sought to convince the president that our allies and partners put forward far more troops in support of stability abroad than America does. In short, America gets a good deal from an overseas military presence. Well, that doesn't fit Trump's narrative, I guess. The president frowned, fiddling with the papers in front of him while he glanced around the room. Mattis's third slide triggered a stronger response from Trump, a visual depiction of our Pacific posture. This slide zoomed in on the U.S. forces located in Japan and South Korea, forces that had kept the peace in both countries for more than 6 decades. It detailed the number of troops in each country, the cost to American taxpayers, and the costs borne by our allies to support forces in their country. Mattis made the point that America had been willing to accept unfair terms following World War II in order to get both countries back on their feet, but that now would be an opportune time to update our trade agreements should Trump desire to do so. Mattis loved this slide because it outlined the significant contributions both nations were making, with Japan footing part of the bill to shift U.S. Marines from Okinawa to Guam, and South Korea paying to move Army soldiers to a new base. He emphasized to the president the importance of Japan paying to offset the costs for a new base, saying it was the first time in history they'd done so. Who is paying the rest of the bill for the move to Guam? The president demanded. He was upset that Japan was only covering part of the total costs required to relocate the base. There was silence, but only briefly. Our trade agreements are criminal, Trump thundered, despite the fact that Mattis was not talking about anything trade-related. Japan and South Korea are taking advantage of the United States. This was decidedly not the message Mattis's slide intended to convey. Out of nowhere, the president added, and the USS Ford, the Navy's newest aircraft carrier, is completely out of control with cost overruns. Mattis struggled to regain control of the meeting. In one sense, he got what he'd wanted. The president was definitely engaged, but not in the way Mattis had hoped. 25 minutes later, it was Tillerson's turn to run the gauntlet. Tillerson was by nature a slow talker. I could tell at once that was not an endearing quality to Trump. When Tillerson's turn was over, Trump looked like a kid who had been told it was time for recess. Cohn's brief was easily the best of the three. It consisted of only 3 slides. Sensing the president's mood, Cohn was in and out in under 5 minutes. All eyes shifted to the president. A very good study, thank you, said Trump. This is one big monster created over a number of years. Japan, Germany, South Korea. Our allies are costing more than anyone else at the table. Again, not the message any of us had intended. Then the president paused. His eyes seemed animated by a thought. Wow, it's a rare subject, rare thing to have happen. He followed with his observations about Macron's handshake and his outburst about Victory Day. When the Secret Service agent asked if we all needed to be there, we stayed seated. Yes, we did. Just try to get us to leave. Mattis and his team's response to the president's suggestion made clear that they were adamantly opposed to a military parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. Mattis and others voiced concern that a parade like what Trump wanted would harken back to Soviet Union-like displays of authoritarian power. Mattis stated that precious taxpayer dollars would be better spent elsewhere and that the optics of such a display of power would boomerang, causing more harm to America's international prestige than any domestic benefit could outweigh. Mattis was also concerned that a parade would risk eroding the military's long-standing apolitical reputation. It didn't matter. Trump was serious. Mattis deflected and played for more time by saying, "We'll take a look at some options and get back to you, Mr. President." On it went, with Tillerson and Mattis taking turns with the president, each jumping in to try to keep the discussion focused on the importance of America's alliance structure, of the critical nature of our global footprint, and the economic benefit the United States derives from ensuring global stability and order. Along the way, Cohn interjected at times, as did Priebus, trying to find some areas of common agreement that would satisfy the president. Pence and Kushner sat stone-faced, not uttering a single word throughout the entire meeting. Maybe they were the smart ones. Over time, Mattis began to shut down, sitting back in his chair with a distant, defeated look on his face. He had cared so much about this meeting, had poured his heart and soul into it, and had believed firmly in his ability to bring Trump around to his way of thinking. None of his attempts were working. From my vantage point, Mattis was playing a game of chess against the president fixated on rock, paper, scissors. Mattis did not think Trump was a raving lunatic, as some were trying to portray the president. Well, you're wrong about that. In fact, Mattis had made a point of noting to us that America elected Trump for a reason. Oh, that's sweet. That the president had tremendous political skills, a sharp intuition, and a formidable business career. Those qualities deserved respect. Sigh again. But still, Trump could tax Mattis's patience, and the president's view of the world was both simplistic and troublesome. That was clear today. Across the table from Mattis, Tillerson also became increasingly frustrated, jousting verbally with the president before becoming so exasperated that he stopped talking completely for the last half hour of the meeting. Tillerson sat back in his chair with his arms crossed, an incredulous scowl on his face as he shot pointed looks over to Mattis. Many times during Tillerson's tenure, reporters would claim that he thought his boss was an idiot, and each time Tillerson would deny it publicly. But there was no doubt among most observers in the room that day, Tillerson was thinking exactly that. Both men, Mattis and Tillerson, were despondent. We had just witnessed a meeting with Trump up close and personal. Now we knew why access was controlled so tightly. For the remainder of the meeting, Trump veered from topic to topic. Syria, Mexico, a recent Washington Post story he didn't like a squirrel caught in traffic, dashing one way and then another. The issues were complicated, yet all the president's answers were simplistic and ad hoc. He was shooting from the hip on issues of global importance. With that, the meeting ended. I learned an important lesson that would pay off when Trump returned for a briefing the following January. Only use slides with pictures, no words. Despite the challenging environment that existed between the Pentagon and the White House, Mattis was able to score a succession of victories, this is the propaganda part here, I guess, over the next 8 months, releasing the nation's first national defense strategy after going more than 10 years without one, working with coalition and Kurdish forces to bring ISIS to the edge of defeat in Syria, that one's out now, and working with Congress to restore funding to begin rebuilding a badly depleted military. We're out of ammunition. Sure. Still, despite those wins, if they were real, Trump and power struggles within the administration soon took their toll on Mattis. Those of us in his front office team watched as ally after ally in the administration, Tillerson, McMaster, and Chief of Staff John Kelly, that's the John I was thinking of, took incoming fire from the White House and the media. By the end of April 2018, Tillerson and McMaster would be gone. On May 11th, 2018, coming to the end here, I think, I watched as the tide within the administration shifted away from Mattis. That day, Mattis hosted a group of newly appointed senior counterparts in the Pentagon, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, along with other principals and military officials. After presentations from Mattis, Bolton, Pompeo, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and Chief Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow, almost everybody gone in these days, Mattis opened the floor for discussion. Things quickly got interesting as senior leaders jockeyed for influence. Bolton jumped right in after Mattis opened the floor, saying that the problem is that all the departments have different priorities. To serve the president, he said, departmental efforts should be integrated. He wasn't wrong, but the way he said it gave me pause. His comment seemed to indicate that as National Security Advisor, he should be the integrator and therefore the de facto lead. After a year within the administration, I thought he was probably right. Someone needed to be in charge of coordinating the administration's efforts. Well, he's out now too. So all of this is like outdated stuff. By the way, now would be an excellent time to mow the lawn outside if anyone is interested in doing that. I hear that someone is. Okay, fantastic. Bolton looked over at Mnuchin. Steve, there are differences, and that's okay. We have to give the president crisper alternatives. Around the table, it went. Bolton was making some compelling points, not the least of which was that the administration was losing time by merely bouncing from distraction to distraction. Mnuchin tried to wield the most influence by making sweeping declarative statements as if he was speaking for the White House. Kudlow was also attempting to assert himself by saying that he and Bolton needed to do a better job with the interagency process, implying that as chief economic advisor, he was the key player in how things ran in the administration. And I guess in their normal circumstances, it's actually true. For the next 5 minutes, Mnuchin and Kudlow went back and forth, cutting each other off to get their word in. It was as if the Treasury Secretary and the economic advisor had started their own trade war at the Pentagon. Mattis finally had enough. He cut Kudlow off mid-sentence. "I think we're all there, Larry." Rejoining the conversation, Mattis employed tired sound bites rather than actually engaging in an in-depth discussion. He seemed weary, and he was. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And we've got just a little bit more of this article to finish up. We'll see if there's anything revelatory, I guess, in the last few paragraphs here. Poor weary Mattis rejoining the discussion at this point. The meeting petered out about an hour and 45 minutes after it started. Sensing things were rapidly coming to a close, Mattis thanked everyone for coming. Gathering his things, he turned and walked out of the room and down the hall, fully expecting the others to flow out of the room behind him. They didn't. Instead, the other principals and uniformed members remained behind and clustered in small groups to continue their conversations. That by itself isn't too noteworthy. Leaders usually congregated afterward to follow up on issues raised during a meeting, but what happened next is Mattis came back. I'd never seen anything like this. Mattis makes a decision and sticks with it, come hell or high water, but this time he didn't. He must have made it down the hall before realizing that no one else had followed him out, then turned around to come back to the room. I watched as 2 minutes after Mattis left the room, he returned, awkwardly standing in the doorway and watching the scene before him. He didn't say a word to anyone. He just stood there by himself. A few people glanced up and saw him standing there, but they didn't invite him into their conversation. After another minute, Mattis slowly turned and walked back out again, alone. I guess that means a lot more to insiders and bureaucrats than the rest of us, but I take some point away from that. The administration, top to bottom, is, and always has been, dysfunctional, to say the very least. I guess the last part we probably could have done without, quite honestly, but okay. I thought the inside view of where the stupid parade idea came from was of some interest. Plus, of course, continued. I love getting those stories of Trump's disinterest in learning anything about the job he's supposed to be doing. But remember, he still considers himself primarily to be in the hospitality business. And I guess that's another illustration of that principle. Okay, so I told you about this crazy meeting yesterday. They had the cabinet meeting. Eric Lipton at the New York Times put this tweet out saying yesterday that Trump went on an extended riff yesterday. He said today, but it was yesterday because that's when he tweeted this, regarding Trump Doral, where he defended the selection of his resort for the G7 meeting and blamed Dems, quote, who went crazy before he killed the plan. Here's the whole thing for the record so you can read his point of view, thanks to the pool reporter, I guess, who provided this near transcript. But just in case you were wondering, among the many stupid things that he said, he began on Doral, saying, Doral was a very simple situation. I own a property in Florida. I was going to do it at no cost or give it for free if I got a ruling, because there's a question about whether or not you're allowed to give it because it's like a contribution to a country. I have to go get a ruling, but I would have given it for nothing. It's a lot of money. This whole thing, by the way, this section of it, I think I actually have some tape of it, and it's maybe it's worth playing because he's extraordinarily peevish in this. I mean, he's a real dick, essentially. I mean, I guess there's really just no other way of putting it. The topics he takes up and the tone he takes and the points he tries to make. And I mean, right up at the top there's the very, very dumb point, if you can even call it that he tries to make with regard to needing to get a ruling. And I'm sure that there's, there's probably all sorts of bureaucracy that you might have to go through in order to, in order to do whatever's necessary for, if it were even a legal thing to do, to host the G7 at Doral. But he's confusing everything with, like a political contribution. He's saying you need to get clearance to make a contribution to a country, which would mean, I guess, this country perhaps is the country he was talking about. I don't know. I'm not even sure but he's vaguely aware of a complication that might have arisen for a political contribution, which I guess is good. I mean, I guess it gives us some sense that he's finally becoming aware of the issue of having foreign interference in an election, the idea of emoluments. I mean, that was part of the comments. I guess probably the hottest topic to come out of this rant was his reference to the emoluments clause as phony somehow. But that's not even in this beginning segment. Let me see if I can open up Pocket on the proper computer here and play you this segment. Did it not take yet? I just designated it for Pocket. Let me reload. There it is. Okay. So this is the audio of the initial part of this transcript that Eric Lipton provided. Let me get it with the audio turned on and rewound all the way. Here we go.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Lots of crosstalk words.
Doral was a very simple situation. I own a property in Florida. I was going to do it at no cost or give it free if I got a ruling, because there's a question as to whether or not you're allowed to give it, because it's like a contribution to a country. I'd have to get a ruling.
There's no, I don't think there even is. Maybe there is some sort of ruling or something, but he's confusing everything. And of course, he offhandedly says, well, I was going to do it for free, and look at how in what confusing terms he says, right? I was going to do it at no cost or give it for free. Now that's the same thing, no cost or giving it for free. What he really meant was, in his other statements, and statements that came out of the White House, was he was planning on allowing the event to be booked there and to charge cost only, no markup, for hosting the event. So doing the event at cost, or, since that didn't satisfy anyone because everyone knows he cheats on such things, no cost. I would have done it for free, which is not really an offer he was making. And that might have required some sort of ruling at some point. But what kind, I am not really sure. But he's just speaking off the cuff here. I'll continue because the really dickish part comes next.
But I would have given it for nothing. It's a lot of money I would have given away. Like I give away my salary. I give away my salary. It's, I guess, close to $450,000. I give it away.
It is $400,000, and everybody knows it. But okay, he says he's got to tack on an extra $50,000, so he's more generous, right?
Nobody ever said he gives away his salary. Now it comes up because of this. But I give away my presidential salary.
What a great man.
They say that no other president has done it.
They do not say that because other presidents have done it. John Kennedy did it, and I think there was one other that was mentioned in the tweeting yesterday, and I want to say possibly Herbert Hoover, who did that as well. But he gets that wrong too. Now, they say no other president has done it. They say one of those, they say things. So you know he's talking out his ass here. He's got no idea whether anybody says anything. He just wants that. He wants people to be saying that so that he can prove them wrong. I do it.
They say that no other president has done it. I'm surprised, to be honest with you. They actually say that George Washington may have been the only other president to do. But see,
they do not say that either. Okay, just to make things clear. Not only did he not do it, nobody says that he did it.
Whether or not Obama gave up his salary. See whether or not all of the other of your favorites give up their salary.
Okay, one of my favorites is John F. Kennedy. I mean, he's really not, but a lot of people like to say so. But okay, so that's one of my favorites, right? He gave up his salary. Herbert Hoover is clearly not one of my favorites. He also gave up his salary. So I don't know. It's just dumb. Of course, he's got no awareness of this stuff. I was aware of the Kennedy thing, not of the Hoover thing. That was new, I think I discovered yesterday. Maybe we'll discover one day that George Washington did, or that he gave back the money for his wooden teeth. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. But once again, he just wants to compare himself to George Washington is what's happening. And he knows that a president did that. And it must be the great George Washington. He's the greatest president of all time. But no, it wasn't.
No. They say it's the only one. They think George Washington did.
They do not even think that. They don't say it, and they don't think it.
$450,000. Close.
It's a lot of money. It's a little bit, he thinks, right? So $450,000, close to that. I don't know what it is, actually.
So I have a place that's in the best location. I'm very good at real estate, very, very good. Much better than you even understand. When you see my financials, which I'll give at the right time. At the right time. Not now, but I'll give it. When I give it to you, it'll be the right time to give it to you. You see my financials, which I'll give at the right time. You'll say, man, he was much better than we even thought.
No, he won't say that.
This guy knows right here, Mnuchin, because he was in the private sector. He knows very much what I have. He would tell you someday.
Yes, he knows very much. Someday you should see his face, too. He's so smug about this. So anyway, that's just him being a dick, talking about how good he is at things and how smart, and maybe someday you'll know how smart I am, but I'm very good at real estate, he concludes. Anyway, there's more that comes next. This Miami, this facility, everybody would have had their own building. Everyone in the G7 would have had their own building. It is so good. Florida loved it. They love economic development, which this isn't, but okay. It's not. It's because it's a beautiful place. It's new. It's not new. It's been totally rebuilt. That may be true, but he didn't pay for any of that. Remember how many people he stiffed just for Doral? It's new. And by the way, I'm not repeating myself here. I'm reading you the transcript verbatim. It's a beautiful place. It's new. It's been totally rebuilt. It's new. Everything's been rebuilt. Everything's new. That's what he said. It's got massive meeting rooms, unlimited for security because it's on, hundreds of acres. The best locations, right next to their airport. Miami International, one of the biggest airports in the world. I did see others tweeting yesterday. Not really, not actually one of the biggest airports in the world. Maybe not even the biggest one in Florida. Orlando might be bigger than that, but by no measure, apparently, one of the biggest airports in the world. Some people say it's the biggest. Nobody does. How do you know? Because he said some people do. So they don't. One of the biggest international airports in the world. Not even close. It's only minutes away. They would have been great. But the Democrats went crazy, even though I would have done it for free, which you wouldn't have. Saved the country a lot of money, which you wouldn't have. Then they say, oh, but you'll get a promotion. You don't think I get enough promotion? I get more promotion than any human being that's ever lived. A lot of it, of course, is stolen from us, you see. I think I can say that's fairly researched. It isn't, of course. I think I get more promotion than any human being that's ever lived. Some good, some bad. People that like me give me only good. People that don't like me give me only bad. But that's the way life is. I don't need promotion. Okay, but I was willing to do this for free. And it would have been the greatest G7 ever. And I would have said to my family, because I don't run the business, because they run my business now. Now, I don't run my business. I actually put all the stuff in trust. They run, and I didn't have to do that. But under no obligation did I pause. Not only is the whole paragraph about the same thing, but said different, not even different ways, said the same way over and over again. Yeah, keep in mind, by the way, he's promising on someone else's behalf. Remember, I don't run the business. My family runs. I got nothing to do with it. But I promise on their behalf, because of how independent they are from me, that they will charge nothing, that they will do this for free and do it happily. And I know they will because I'm Donald Trump and I still run the effing business. They got nothing to do with it. They don't know what they're doing. I'm going to force them to do it for free, even though he wasn't going to. He was going to force them to do it, quote unquote, at cost, which would have been a lie, I promise you. But okay, we'll never find out. So, George Washington, back to George Washington. He ran his business simultaneously while he was president. It was, of course, his household was his business. Now, that was a business in the day. It was a plantation, and he had property all over the place. And, of course, there was no precedent for running things, and the federal government was much, much smaller. And, of course, he had been the commanding general of the Continental Army, which did, in fact, ram the ramparts, take over the airports. So everybody knew that he was a real go-getter, a real doer. You know what I'm saying? This guy, Trump, the record is mixed. The science is still out on whether or not Trump can do the job Washington did. I've never seen him ram a rampart, not even one. But that doesn't stop him from making the claims later on that he did, by the way. So, George Washington, he ran his business simultaneously while he was president. Many other presidents. There weren't too many other really rich presidents. Basically, they were all actually quite rich. But there were a few. They ran their business. Hey, Obama made a deal for a book. Is that running a business? No, it's not, actually. I'm sure he didn't even discuss it while he was president. Yeah, he has a deal with Netflix. When did they start talking about that? That's only, a couple of examples. By the way, how long does it take to make a deal with Netflix? The guy hasn't been president for 3 years. But other presidents, if you look, were wealthy. Not huge wealth, because you got to insult all of them. George Washington, once again, was considered a very, very rich man at that time. But they ran their businesses. George Washington, they say, had 2 desks. He had a presidential desk and a business desk. I don't think you people with this phony emoluments clause, and where does that even come into things? But that's what he throws in there, the phony emoluments clause. By the way, why would Washington have 2 desks if he indeed did have to? I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that about him, but I would imagine that if it were true, it would be easy to understand. It would be essentially a declaration from George Washington that I am keeping my business separate from presidential business. I guess the real issue is why does Trump have any desk at all? There's nothing he does that requires a desk, except that he needs to sit somewhere and be able to hide whatever's going on in his wrinkled pants. And that's how he takes photographs. But okay. He's actually telling a story about the separation of the business of state from personal business and doesn't even realize it. So, and by the way, he continues on, I would say that it's cost me anywhere from $2 billion to $5 billion to be president. I don't think that's even near the case. He's profiting enormously. And that's okay. He says, between what I lose and what I could have made, I would have made a fortune. But I would have just ran my business. I was doing it very well. I have a great business and the best properties. More being a dick. But between what I was and, some properties, he's not done bragging about his properties. Some properties, to raise an example, Doral was setting records when I bought it because I owned it for a period of time. What does that even mean? Setting records. It's, of course, now losing money hand over fist. But because there was nothing like it. It was making a fortune. And then what happened? I announced I'm going to run for office, and all of a sudden I say, we have to build a wall. We got to have borders. We got to have this. We got to have that. We got to ram the ramparts. Got to take over the airports. Got to do whatever we have to do. Because I don't know more than 3 things in the list. Not even 2. But build a wall, have borders, which are both the same thing, and then he resorts to, got to have this, got to have that. All of a sudden, some people didn't like it. They thought the rhetoric was too tough, and it went from doing great things to doing fine. It does very nicely now. It's actually coming back, I understand, very strongly. But Doral was setting records, and I knew this would happen. Most of the stuff that I had, because now instead of setting 100% of the market that loves you, and they love your brand, and it's luxury, and it's great, now you have 50% of the market. That's called politics. I fully understood that. So it's cost me between $2 billion and $5 billion. I'm sure that's wildly off the mark. And if I had to do it again, I would do it in an instant, because who cares? If you can afford it, what difference does it make? If I had this to do again, because I'm making a big difference for the country. The country is stronger now than it's been many years, maybe ever. Our military is rebuilt. Our economy is hitting records, again with the records. As I said, best unemployment numbers, best employment numbers. We're strong. We're bringing our soldiers back home from the endless wars. We're doing great. We're, of course, sending them to different parts of the Middle East instead. But whatever. So, whether I lost $2 billion, $5 billion, more or less, it doesn't make any difference to me. I don't care. If you're rich, it doesn't matter. Oof, that's bad. I'm doing this for the country. I'm doing it for the people that show up. I haven't had an empty seat at a rally. We've seen them all, of course. I always say, where's the rally? That's great. I always say, where am I? What am I doing here? It's in a certain place. Okay, just get the biggest arena. He never does, of course. I go to these massive basketball arenas, like in Dallas, where the Mavericks play. In Philadelphia, I set a record. I set a record for every place I've been, because we just need a little small stage. We don't need basketball courts. Ice hockey courts. Ice hockey courts, that's what they call them, yeah. And I take less than musicians, because they have bands. I don't have bands. I could set a world record for someone without a guitar, okay? I don't have bands. I don't even know what the F he thinks he's saying. So that's the story. And you know, those people are the poll. And I have great polls. I have my best polls now. I think it's because people think it's terrible what they do. Pelosi, Shifty Schiff, Schumer. These people are trying to destroy the country. It's a very bad thing what they're doing. The President of the United States should be able to run the country and not have to focus on this kind of crap. It's too bad, right? What he has to focus on. Anyway, there was more, of course, and that's all I've got here at the moment, just to give you an idea of just what sort of gibberish he was blathering about. But recall also, I think this was this the same meeting in which he said that he was crediting himself for capturing everyone in ISIS. I'm the one doing the capturing. By the way, instant polling death for any politician who attempts to personally take responsibility for a military operation. I think, especially having, had draft deferments for heel spurs, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that was maybe the day before. But just another amazing point that he blurts out, saying, you should all be crediting me. The reason ISIS had been captured in the first place is that I was the one doing all the capturing. I'm the one who did the capturing. I'm the one who knows more about it than you people or the fake pundits, Trump said of ISIS to the media assembled in the cabinet room. And I think it was the same meeting. That was Josh Dawsey tweeting about that one, according to what the pool feed was putting out. It was really an amazing event yesterday, and it just rolled off our backs because, just like everything else, it's these lunatics, this insane ranting, and there's this normalization process, and it's not even necessarily overt normalization decision being made. It's just the decision to simply cover everything that he says from start to finish. I don't recall them ever airing a press availability in the middle of the day for no particular reason other than the fact that the president was speaking. But they do that now thinking that he'll say something outrageous, which he does do. I mean, they're not wrong that he's going to say something newsworthy because of how dumb it is. But it is troublesome to decide, what are we going to do about covering this thing? He is going to say something stupid. Everyone should know that. But maybe we should stop giving him this platform. Maybe he would stop talking. Maybe he would stop saying such dumb things if there weren't cameras in here. And that might help things. But anyway, he decided to give himself, hang himself a little more by claiming personal responsibility for capturing ISIS. And they're free, so I guess that was worth nothing. Many other things that we haven't gotten to yet today, and which will no doubt fill lots of time with in the next couple of days. But a couple of items that I wanted to bring up in scanning through here. I noticed this one too. I want to put this one on the record. You probably already guessed about what I think about this, but I saw, and many people reacted to, the tweet from Russ Vogt. Is that how he pronounces it? Vought. Russ Vogt is actually the one who is day-to-day in charge of OMB in the absence of Mick Mulvaney. He actually calls himself the acting OMB director. And this is the interesting thing here. He has tweeted, "I saw some fake news over the weekend to correct. As the White House letter made clear 2 weeks ago, OMB officials, myself and Mike Duffy, will not be complying with deposition requests this week." Hashtag here is sham process, he has to say. These are, they've been not subpoenaed, but requested to come and give depositions in these closed hearings that they've been doing the last couple of weeks. Very effective, and they've talked to a lot of very interesting figures who have voluntarily come forward. But these two guys, Russ Vogt and Mike Duffy, OMB guys, apparently they're the ones most directly responsible for executing the orders of the White House to hold up the aid to Ukraine in the big quid pro quo. So they say they're not going to come. They haven't yet been subpoenaed. Once they are subpoenaed, they may defy those subpoenas, just add them to the list. But here's what I wanted to put out there for you to consider. These are the guys who are the ones in charge of releasing or not releasing the money. Even though it is actually illegal for them, just flat out illegal for them not to release the money once it's been duly appropriated. There was no basis on which they held this up. They simply said, we have the pen that signs the order and we're just not going to do it. So I'm wondering, I'm serious about this, can anybody establish for me that Russ Vogt and Mike Duffy didn't steal the money? I mean, I don't necessarily think that they did, but it's a serious question. What happened to the money? Now, I bring that up just to pique some interest in it. And others pointed out to me, for instance, as I thought they might, that, well, wasn't the money actually released? Didn't they sometime around September 11th, actually? When the story began to finally break, they panicked and released the money. It had been held up for many weeks, but they then released it, which, of course, it only occurs to me. No. Are you sure that they did? I am not positive that they did. And like every other piece of Trump paperwork, you should demand to see it. Because all we have, people pointed me to the articles that said, yeah, here they are, dated like September 12th. The Trump administration, caught with their hand in the cookie jar, has given up and finally released the money to try and relieve the pressure from the emerging quid pro quo Ukraine scandal. And it, of course, occurred to me, as it is occurring to you right now, I am sure that all we have is that report. Where does the report come from? The report comes from someone like Russ Vogt and Mike Duffy or their press secretaries saying, yeah, well, that story is over. We released the money. To which I have to say, did you? Is there some paperwork that says that you did? Surely there's some paperwork somewhere, some orders that have to be signed in order to release the funds. Maybe there would be some documentation over there in Ukraine. But I don't know whether Ukraine is willing to give that information to us or to confirm or deny whether or not they got the money. I don't know whether they feel able to speak honestly about whether or not they got the money. They've been over a barrel the whole time in all of this. So, we don't know really for sure what happened to this money and whether the orders were signed. Maybe Russ and Mike did steal it. Why not clear it up? Maybe the actual chair of the House Appropriations Committee or the Speaker of the House should call the police, the local police, and report the Ukrainian aid money stolen and see what happens by way of investigation after that. Surely there would be some paperwork here, right? And all I'm saying is, I'd like to see the paperwork. I would like to not see the press say, wait, what happened to that Ukrainian aid? It's a big story. Oh, yeah, well, we fixed all of that. We released it. Oh, yeah? Can you show me the paperwork that proves it? I gotta go. I don't mean to lay this on journalists. You know, this is a big thing. We have to remember every day that they could just be lying. But after all, we are talking to the same officials who broke the law to hold the money up the first time. Are we sure they're not simply lying to us now? You are outlaws, after all, and this is your fault. Could you just be lying and saying, I hope they print that we release the funds so that there's no more pressure about this, but in the meantime, let's not release the funds. And if they didn't do that, well, where are the funds? Did they keep them? Are they still in the Treasury? I don't know. You don't know. That's the point. Can someone ask around? Can we find out? Would that be too much? It's like reporting.
From Daily Kos
we could
Radio
try.
on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
All right, it's time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. You know he's going to be covering all the stuff we didn't get to. For instance, that the GOP is strangely silent about the State Department exonerating Hillary Clinton. It only got printed on page A16 of the New York Times, though, over those stupid email scandals. Can you believe it? I can't imagine that happening.